Looking back on that night, I still can't believe how quickly everything changed. I was 13, watching my little sister, while our parents went to a friend's dinner party across town. It was supposed to be an easy evening, just me and 8-year-old Emma watching cartoons and eating the pizza Mom had left for us. The first sign that something was wrong came around 8:30 p.m. It started as a nagging sensation at the back of my neck, like when you feel someone watching you but can't see them. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the TV show Emma was enjoying, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Being a kid who grew up on horror movies, I'd always imagined how I'd handle a scary situation. But nothing prepares you for the moment you actually see a stranger's face pressed against your kitchen window, watching your little sister with unblinking eyes. The man looked wild, matted gray hair, dirty beard, wearing what looked like a torn hospital gown under a ragged coat. My heart nearly stopped, but years of playing baseball had taught me one thing. When you're up at bat, you can't show fear. I kept my expression neutral, pretending I hadn't seen him. Instead, I turned to Emma and said, as casually as possible, "Hey, Squirt, it's getting late. Mom would kill me if I let you stay up past bedtime. Let's head upstairs." Emma protested. "Of course. But Jake, you promised I could stay up until Mom and Dad got home." "Tell you what," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You can read comics in bed until you fall asleep." I made sure to stay between her and the kitchen window as we headed upstairs. Once I got Emma settled in her room, I grabbed my baseball bat from my bedroom. It was an old Louisville Slugger I'd used all through Little League, and its familiar weight in my hands helped calm my nerves. I checked that Emma's window was locked, then told her to stay in bed and keep quiet. We were going to play a special game where she had to pretend to be invisible. I called 911 first, speaking in whispers. The dispatcher said officers were on their way, but could take up to 20 minutes. Then I called Dad, my hands shaking as I explained the situation. They were at least 30 minutes away. "Stay with your sister," Dad said, his voice tight with worry. "We're coming home now. Don't try to be a hero." That's when I heard it, the sound of breaking glass from downstairs, followed by heavy footsteps on the kitchen floor. Emma's eyes went wide, but before she could make a sound, I pressed my finger to my lips and gestured for her to hide under her blanket. The footsteps moved through the house methodically. I could hear drawers being opened, things being moved around. My hands were sweating on the baseball bat as I positioned myself in front of Emma's door. I'd moved her dresser partially in front of it, not enough to look suspicious from the outside, but enough to make the door harder to open quickly. The stairs creaked. 1, 2, 3 steps, then silence. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. More creaking as he continued up. I tried to remember everything I'd learned in baseball about maintaining control under pressure, about focusing on the moment, about being ready to react. He tried my parents' door first, then the bathroom. Each time the door hinges groaned in protest. Emma's room was last in the hallway, and I knew he'd reach us eventually. I could hear his breathing now, ragged and uneven, just outside in the hall. The doorknob turned slowly. When the door met resistance from the dresser, there was a moment of silence. Then pressure. He was pushing against it. The dresser scraped against the floor as the door inched open. I raised the bat, remembering Coach Miller's words. "Keep your eye on the target. Plant your feet and follow through." But before the door could open fully, a new sound filled the house. Police sirens, followed by car doors slamming and voices shouting, "Police! Come out with your hands up!" The pressure on the door stopped immediately. Heavy footsteps thundered back down the stairs. I held my position, bat still raised, until I heard the sounds of a struggle downstairs, followed by an officer calling up, "Everyone okay up there?" Only then did I lower the bat and pull Emma into a tight hug. She was shaking, but she hadn't made a sound the entire time. Later, we learned the truth. The man had escaped from a psychiatric facility 50 miles away, He'd been off his medication for days, wandering through neighborhoods, watching families through windows. The police found a notebook in his pocket with addresses of houses where he'd seen children alone or lightly supervised. Our address was circled. Mom and Dad got home just as the police were leading him away. Mom burst into tears when she saw us, and Dad hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. I tried to apologize for not noticing the man sooner, but Dad stopped me. "You protected your sister," he said. "You did everything right. That was 5 years ago. I'm in college now, and Emma's 13, the same age I was that night. Sometimes when I'm home visiting, I catch her looking at that old baseball bat, which now hangs on my bedroom wall. She doesn't remember everything from that night, but she remembers feeling safe, feeling protected. Last week, she started baseball practice. When I asked her why she chose baseball over her usual soccer, she just smiled and said, 'Sometimes a good swing is all you need.' I didn't tell her how those words made my throat tight, how they took me back to that night, standing in front of her door with my Louisville slugger, praying I wouldn't have to find out if my swing was good enough. The experience changed me, but not in the way you might expect. I didn't become paranoid or fearful. Instead, I learned something about myself, that when it matters most, fear can become focus, and the instinct to protect can overcome any hesitation. Now I'm studying criminal psychology, hoping to understand and prevent the kind of break that sent that man to our house that night. But I still keep a baseball bat in my apartment, just in case, and whenever I babysit my young cousins, I make sure to check the windows first thing. Some lessons, once learned, stay with you forever. Mom says I'm overprotective now, but after that night, I learned that sometimes being overprotective isn't such a bad thing, because you never know when you might need to step up to the plate and protect what matters most. If you've watched this far, please help us out with a milestone by subscribing. It motivates us to keep making more content. Now, let's keep the stories going, get cozy and settled. I was 15 when I learned why parents set rules about staying home alone. Not in the usual way teens learn lessons. This was different. This was the kind of lesson that leaves you jumping at shadows for months afterward. It was a Wednesday afternoon in April when my parents took my younger sister to her dance competition 2 towns over. I'd begged to stay home, claiming I had too much homework to waste a whole day watching dance routines. Really, I just wanted to experience that sweet taste of freedom that comes with having the house to yourself for the first time. "Don't leave the house," Mom had said sternly, "and keep the doors locked." I remember rolling my eyes at her paranoia. We lived in a safe neighborhood after all. Nothing ever happened here. The first few hours were amazing. I blasted my music, raided the snack cabinet, and sprawled across the entire couch. All the little luxuries you can't enjoy with family around. Then my friend Katie texted, asking if I wanted to come over and check out her new PlayStation. I stood in the hallway, staring at that text, my mother's words echoing in my head. But the allure of freedom in video games was too strong. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, not even thinking about the back door I'd left unlocked when I'd let the dog out earlier. 3 hours later, I returned home feeling pretty pleased with myself. No one would ever know I'd left. But the moment I stepped into the kitchen, something felt wrong. The air felt different somehow, disturbed. That's when I noticed the drawers. 3 of them stood slightly open, though I was certain they'd been closed when I left. My heart started beating faster as I looked around. Small things seemed out of place. A chair slightly askew, a cabinet door ajar, my mom's favorite throw pillow on the floor instead of the couch. Each detail on its own could be nothing, but together they painted a picture that made my skin crawl. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Is anyone here?" Silence answered back, but it wasn't a comfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that feels like it's listening to you. My phone buzzed, making me jump. Unknown number. I usually ignored those, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" Heavy breathing filled my ear, followed by what sounded like someone walking. The footsteps echoed, as if they were moving across a hard floor. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my attempt to sound tough. The call ended abruptly. 30 seconds later, another call from the same unknown number. This time, when I answered, the breathing was closer to the phone, more intentional. Then a whisper, so quiet I almost missed it. Your parents should have taught you to lock the doors. That's when I heard it, creaking floorboards from upstairs. In our old house, you could always tell when someone was walking around up there. I'd heard that sound 1,000 times, but never had it filled me with such terror. I didn't waste time trying to be quiet. I ran. Through the kitchen, out the back door, across our yard, and into the woods behind our house. I didn't stop until I reached the big oak tree that marked the property line. With trembling fingers, I called 911. While I waited for them to arrive, I could see the upstairs lights in my house turning on one by one. The police found the back door wide open, and clear signs someone had gone through the house. They never caught whoever it was, but they did find something that still haunts me. A notebook on the kitchen table that hadn't been there before. Inside were detailed notes about our family's routines, including when my sister's dance competitions were scheduled. Mom and Dad grounded me for a month when they found out I'd left the house. I didn't even argue. These days, when I babysit my sister, and she complains about not being allowed to go out when she's home alone, I don't roll my eyes anymore. Instead, I check the locks twice and keep my phone close. Because I learned the hard way that parents' rules aren't always about control. Sometimes they're about keeping you safe from the monsters who wait for you to break them. They say your name is the sweetest sound you can hear, unless you're home alone and someone whispers it from an empty room. This happened to me twice in my childhood home, and even now, 30 years later, I can recall every detail with perfect clarity. The first call, I was 10 years old when it happened the first time. We lived in a modest ranch-style house built in the 1960s in rural Virginia, the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, but the houses were far enough apart that you couldn't see them through the trees. It wasn't a big house by any standards. 3 small bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a cramped kitchen that opened into a living room, and narrow hallways that always seemed to creak at night. That September afternoon was uncomfortably warm, and I remember being irritated that the school bus's air conditioning wasn't working. By the time I trudged up our gravel driveway, my shirt was sticking to my back, and all I could think about was getting inside to use the bathroom. Mom wouldn't be home for hours. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital and always had the day shift. Dad was away on one of his frequent business trips. I let myself in through the side door, dropped my backpack on the kitchen counter, and headed straight for the bathroom. I was sitting there, flipping through a comic book I'd snuck from my backpack, when I heard it. Annie Bean. That's what they called me back then, a nickname my grandmother had given me that stuck. The voice sounded exactly like my mom's, coming from just outside the bathroom door, at the junction where the hallway met the living room. My heart stopped. The comic book slipped from my fingers and hit the linoleum floor with a soft pat. The house was supposed to be empty. I knew it was empty. I just walked through it. The voice had been so clear, so distinctly my mother's. But Mom was at work. I'd watched her leave that morning in her white nurse's uniform. I sat there, frozen, barely breathing, straining to hear any other sounds. Footsteps, movement, anything. The house remained silent except for the quiet hum of our old refrigerator and the distant ticking of the kitchen clock. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I gathered my courage and opened the bathroom door. The hallway was empty. I checked every room, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Nothing was disturbed. No doors or windows were open. I ended up sitting on our front porch until Mom came home, too scared to stay inside. When I told her what happened, she smiled and said I must have been daydreaming. The second call. 3 years later, I had almost convinced myself that first incident had been my imagination. I was 13 in 8th grade and feeling very grown up about being allowed to stay home alone on weekends while Mom worked overtime and Dad was traveling. It was a gray November Saturday, the kind of day that never quite seems to brighten up fully. The trees outside my window were nearly bare, their branches making skeletal shadows on the lawn. I was at the kitchen table, working on a history project, surrounded by textbooks and notebook paper. The house was quiet, except for the scratch of my pencil and the occasional rustle of paper. I remember feeling peaceful, enjoying the solitude and the soft, diffused light coming through the kitchen window. That's when I heard it again. Annie Bean. A woman's voice, gentle but clear as crystal, coming from the end of the hallway. This time, I didn't freeze. I bolted. I grabbed my coat from the back of my chair and was out the side door before my brain could even process what I was doing. I ran to our detached garage and climbed up to the small storage loft where Dad kept his old tools. Through the dusty window, I could see our house's back door. I waited there, shivering, watching to see if anyone would come out. No one did. No doors opened. No windows moved. The house sat there, looking exactly as it always had, betraying nothing of what had just happened inside. I stayed in that garage until dusk, when Mom's car finally pulled into the driveway. This time, when I told her what happened, I saw something flicker across her face. Recognition, maybe, or worry. Years passed. I grew up, went to college, started a career. But life has a way of bringing you full circle. When Dad passed away 5 years ago, I moved back home to help Mom, who was struggling with arthritis and shouldn't be living alone. The house hadn't changed much. Same narrow hallways, same creaky floors, same memories lurking in every corner. One evening, about a month after I'd moved back in, Mom and I were sitting in the living room watching TV when she suddenly turned to me and said, "I need to tell you something." She told me how, in the years after Dad died, she would often hear his voice calling her name from different rooms in the house. She'd go to look, knowing it was impossible, only to find empty rooms and quiet air. "I never told you this," she continued, "but before you were born, your grandmother, the one who gave you your nickname, she lived here with us for a while. She passed away in what became your bedroom. Sometimes in the months after she died, I would hear her calling me, just like I hear your father now." We sat in silence for a while after that confession. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through our living room windows. The house creaked and settled around us. Familiar sounds that had once terrified me, but now felt almost comforting. "Do you still hear the voice?" Mom asked finally. "The one that used to call you Annie Bean?" I shook my head. The voice had gone quiet after that second time, never to return. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is still and the hallway is dark, I find myself listening. Not out of fear anymore, but out of curiosity. Because now I wonder, was it really my grandmother's voice all those years ago? Was she checking on me, watching over me in her own way? These days, when Mom tells me she's heard Dad calling her name, I don't dismiss it as imagination, like she did with my experiences all those years ago. Instead, I make us both a cup of tea, and we sit in the living room, sharing stories about the people we've lost and the ways they might still be trying to reach us. The house doesn't feel scary anymore. It feels like a place where memories have soaked into the walls, where love lingers long after the people who created it are gone. Sometimes when I'm alone in the kitchen doing dishes, I catch myself listening for that gentle voice calling Annie Bean. It hasn't come again, but part of me hopes that someday it will. Our little house may be old and simple, but it holds more than just our family's belongings. It holds our history, our stories, and maybe even a few unexplainable moments that remind us that love doesn't always end when someone leaves us. It just changes form, becoming something we might not understand, but can still feel. Like a whisper in an empty hallway, or the sound of a familiar voice calling our name.